Okay, so now it's 7 o'clock. We don't need to wait other people. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to join this Flutter Meetup event. My name is Yufeng Chen, the organizer for this meetup. Today, I'm very delighted to feature Jhin Lee, the GDG and the Flutter Montreal organizer, as the speaker for this event. Jhin is a full-stack developer at Unity. As the GDG and Flutter Montreal organizer, he has plenty of working experience on embedded system, backend, Android, iOS, Flutter, and web development. He's passionate about building innovative products. So welcome everyone. Same as all other Flutter Meetup events, today's session will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Thank you, Jhin. Now the floor is you. You can share your screen.
All right. Thank you very much for the amazing introduction. All right. I'm going to share my screen.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So everyone see my screen? Maybe you can do the reaction. Sum up.
Yeah, you can see it.
Cool. All right. So let's start. So thank you, Shao. All right. So today we're going to talk about state management using Riverpod. So it's going to be beginners to probably intermediate targeted session. And I am Jhin Lee and Flutter Montreal and GDG organizer in Montreal. All right. Yufeng already did my introduction for myself. And yeah, I work for Unity, full stack developer, and I have some diverse experience in dev. And I am really into Scrum and Agile. And if you want to connect with me, here's the LinkedIn address or QR code. And you can also ask in the chat if you want. Later, I can share again. All right. So today, the agenda, we're going to start we are in an introduction now, and then we're going to talk about some core concept and how to use, and we'll go through some demo, and then we'll finish with the Q&A. All right. So what is state management? So I just copied from the official document for this GIF. So I don't know if you see here the red card. This is the state of the application. And this state is shared in between screens or widgets. So you see the red arrows are coming. So it goes to my card, go and back from my list and so on. So from the application, it's throughout the card state, and then any part of the application is render the widget based on the state. That's basically state management, and that's all. All right. So in Flutter, we always say Flutter is declarative. So what does it mean, declarative? Okay, before we go to declarative, let's see what is imperative. The imperative is about giving the instruction to the computer that step by step. So on the right side, if you see the code, let's say there's a view B, and then you are setting the color. Okay, B, I'm going to set the color red. I'm going to clear the children of the B, and then I'm going to define the view C, and then I'm going to add the C3 to the B, and then I'm going to render the B view. So you are giving the all instruction one by one to the computer. So what to do, right? That's the imperative way of programming or making the UI. So then, like I say, Flutter is declarative. What is declarative is what you focus on the desired outcome, meaning that on the right side, you see the code, declarative. So there's a view B, and then the color is red, and then the children of the view B, it's a view C. So this is what we say declarative. So we just define the state, and then the the computer is going to render the screen based on what you want, right? So Flutter is declarative. It means that Flutter builds its user interface to reflect the current state of your application, like what I just said, right? So on the other drawing over there, you see UI equal the build method function. You give the state to the function, and then you have the UI. That's basically what we declare. Declare the state, make the UI. That is what we say Flutter is declarative. All right. So in the Flutter in general, there's two different types of state. One is ephemeral. The other one is application state. So it's typically based on the scope. So ephemeral is a local state, and application state is global state. So in your application, if you are managing one state throughout every part of your application, that's the global state. And if your state is only lived in your widget, that is the local state. Usually for the local state, you can just easily manage with stateful widget and the set state. Probably you already know if you already know the basic of the Flutter, right? But the thing is that if you want to do the global state, that might require some complexity or some effort to implement all the things. So there's a comparison. On the left side is the local state. On the right side is global state. Left side is limited in the widget, and it's short-lived, and it's simple. You use the stateful widget with set state. That's good enough, right? But if you want to control the global state, it has to live throughout the application. Of course, it's going to be long-lived, and how you're going to manage it, it might be complex. So that's why I'm proposing to use Riverpod or any other state management solution. By the way, if you have any question in the meantime, you can raise your hand. All right, so let me ask a question. Do you really need a state management for your application? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? So let's go back to this slide. So let's say you have state for your login screen only. So meaning that it's local state, right? Do you really need to have state management solution to manage, to draw the local, to draw my login screen? Probably you don't need it, right? But the card here is the application state, right? So I need to use this state in the catalog screen and then in the list of the catalog, and then I also want to use it in the my cart screen. In this case, probably you want to use state management or management solution to make it easy. So think about it. If you want to do that without state management system, there might be some different solutions, but easy way is making you want to pass down all the state. Let's say my app is holding the cart state, and then you're gonna pass down to the children, and then pass down to the cart. Maybe it's not too deep, but let's say you have another widget inside of your list item. Then you have to pass down, really go into the deep, and then how you're gonna manage it, right? So to make all those kind of things easy is usually what we are focusing with state management solutions. All right. So now is the time to talk about the Riverpod. All right, the Riverpod is written by Remy Reslet. So he is also the author of Provider and Freeze. Both package is really popular. And Riverpod is reactive caching framework for Flutter and Dart. So meaning that Riverpod support not only Flutter, but also pure Dart. And what's interesting here, or what we need to remember, is that Riverpod is not state management package or library. It's a reactive caching framework, but we can use it to manage the state. So we can cache the state using the Riverpod, and then thanks to reactive framework, so once the caching data in the Riverpod is changed, we can react in our UI to re-render the UI based on the changed state. And Riverpod is making that possible and easy. And Riverpod is successor of provider package, meaning that, okay, Remy Roslet built provider on top of change notifier that they already provided from Google, but he thought that is not enough because when you use provider, it might be crash in the runtime. Let's say if you didn't initialize the provider in your application, and then if you try to use it, it crashes in your application while it's running, right? But Riverpod doesn't have that because you can check if there's any error, this kind of thing, you already know from the compile time. So even before you run your application, you already know your code is not going to work. Right? Ali, I see you raise your hand. You can unmute and say.
I just want to know about the caching system. How does it work? Like, what is the mechanism of the caching framework? I don't know what is it about.
So basically, this is all about memory caching. So let's say you downloaded something from the web, it will be stored in the memory throughout the application. And anyone is watching this, let's say Riverpod provider, and if the cache data is changed, then they're gonna be notified automatically. So that's it. When I say cache here, it's all about memory. It's not about persistence.
Like Flutter use estates. Like, how does this estate cache to the? I mean, is that like caching the estates or something? I don't understand because the data is. I know how caching system works, but I don't know how does it work on the Riverpod. Like you mentioned, like is that the estate cached or?
Okay, so this you can think the cache when you're saying here is not about the caching strategy or caching system that usually we use in the web, right? So here the cache means that instance of your data, instance of your whatever the class or anything.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Okay, and then we just caching it in the memory, and then we just use it wherever in your application you need it. I'm gonna show you in the next slide, maybe with a little more detail.
Okay, sure, thank you.
All right. So, all right. So I can go to the next slide. Yeah. Before I go further, I just want to give you some small difference between Riverpod and provider. So can you do the reaction if anyone already know provider, by the way? You can do sum up or anything. Okay, no one knows provider. Okay, Ali knows. Okay, so people don't really know. So I think, okay, Song and Ali. All right, so I can still give you this small difference for you.
Maybe they don't know how to react. Let's wait.
It's okay. Anyway, I'm gonna go through. All right. So the main difference is how providers are defined. Okay, Riverpod, we called it the package name as Riverpod, but actually it's provider too. So we are using the same name, it's provider. And how you define the provider in the Riverpod and provider, there's a slight difference. In Riverpod, we define the provider as like global variable. And this one is just live throughout anywhere in your application. And it automatically disposes when no one is using it. And I'm going to show you later about that with more detail. And with provider package, the provider widget placed inside a wizard tree. So this one is the how you define. So providers are under the wizard tree, and providers are actually wizard, and that is going to be the scope of your provider state. So the wizard under the provider, you can use the state in the provider, okay? But with a Riverpod, it's just like pure Dart object declared as global. So you can just use it anywhere in your application, anywhere in your wizard tree, and you can just define the scope of the provider. There's some technique of doing that, but generally we recommend using the global scope so that you can just use provider anywhere in your application. So that, if I have time, I can also explain a little bit about the scope, but probably I might not have time for today. But if you have any question, I can cover later. All right, so yeah, like I already explained, Riverpod provider can be used in any Dart application. And provider can be only used in the Flutter application, thanks to the Riverpod is written in pure Dart object. That's the main difference. All right, so now talk about Riverpod provider. So from now on, when I say provider, it's not package name. It's that I know that can be a little confusing, but provider is Riverpod provider from now on. Okay. So provider is just an object that encapsulates a state, and provider allows to listening to the change. Let's say whatever the state changes, then you can get notified automatically. And provider allow easy access to a state from the different places, so meaning that you can access this state from anywhere in your application. And provider replaces pattern like singleton, service locator, dependency injection, or inherited wizard, and so on. So the Riverpod provider is actually really simple stuff, but it can cover many things. So when I use provider, I had to use for example, get it to manage the service locator and dependency injection. I used that. But with Riverpod, I didn't need any of that. So with just simple package, I was able to make my code much cleaner and less dependent on any different packages or technology or stacks. So how it looks like that. So this one is example with code generation. Riverpod provider you can create without code generation, but if you use code generation, the syntax is going to get really simple. So this is how you define the provider. So if you define this one, then you can access from anywhere of your code with the hello world provider that give you hello world string state. All right. So there's a many type of provider, and there's even legacy providers and new providers and so on. But you don't need to remember all these things actually. So what you need to remember is function provider and class provider. So this is also thanks to the code generation. I think I put yeah. So once you write the syntax, something like that, it will automatically decide which provider to use when it generates the code, right? So there's only what do you need to remember? Again, function provider, class provider. Using the code generation, then it will automatically create the code with right provider that you need. All right, so code generation. Who likes code generation? Can you do the reaction? Or who hates code generation? Let's say, who hates code generation? Thumb down. Okay, no one hates code generation, that's good. So I I was the one actually. I don't like code generation. I still don't like code generation. So Riverpod, you can still do it without code generation, but it's recommended still. And I don't know if you already using Freeze, then Freeze is also rely on the code generation, right? So if anyway gonna use it, then why don't I just use it, right? But there's one thing I want to mention, that for some people it doesn't like code generation. I think it's not, I mean, no one in this room, that's good. But in Dart, the static meta programming is coming. So Google is working on it. I hope this will be released in this year, maybe not, but maybe next year. Then Riverpod is not going to rely on the code generation, but it will in the compile time, it will automatically the compile using the static meta programming syntax. So if that is your concern, hopefully that will be fixed in a few months or at least a year. We'll see. So if you, later I'm going to share the slide, but you can go and check more detail of the code generation. I put some link in the official website. And if you click the static meta programming link, it will go to the RFC that Google is actually working on about the meta programming. All right, now let's talk about how to define the provider. So like I say, there's two, you only need to remember two types of provider: function provider, class provider, okay? So function provider, you don't, when do you use function provider? When you don't need to mutate the state, meaning that your state is read-only, right? So here, I'm doing the dependency injection using the Riverpod here. So I defined repository provider that initialize repository instance and then just return it. So here, if I want to have different repository instance, I can't, because this one is read-only, right? But on the other hand, class provider, I want to change it, the state. So here is the to-do provider. And in the build method, this build method is going to get called when the provider is initialized for the first time. It returns empty array or empty list of to-do, right? Then this one is going to be empty at the beginning. And every time add to-do is called, then it will add new to-do, right? So this way, you are changing the state. You are mutating the state. So if you need this kind of use case, then you want to use class provider. That's the only thing you need to remember, how to define a provider. All right. So we check how to define. So now we're going to check how to read the provider state. So there's three ways of reading the provider state. So first one is ref watch. So if you use it in a provider or in a widget, every time the provider that you are watching is changed, your widget is going to be re-rendered automatically. So that's the watch. And there's another one, listen. This one is you can register your callback. So let's say the state is changed for your provider, then it will only call the callback, but it will not re-render your widget. And the other one is ref read. So this one is just only one-time read. So you read state, and that's it. Even the state is changed, your widget is never going to know. So whenever it's possible, we recommend you to use ref watch rather than listen or read. Because if you use watch, meaning that your widget is going to be always react to the change to the provider. But if you use listen or read, maybe there's the small, I mean, you might make some mistake, possibly, right? So it's always safer to use watch first. And then if you really need to optimize something using the listen or read, then you can do later. All right. So we're going to see some examples of providers. So this one is provider of the counter example. So let's say I define the provider. So counter provider I define as class provider. So the build function is returning 0, meaning that initial value of this provider is going to be 0. And then every time increment is called, then it will just add +1, and then it will return, it will assign to the state. Then it will keep increasing the number +1, +1, +1. And in the wizard, what you do is I use the watch, right? So I use the ref watch counter provider, meaning that every time provider value changes, this home view wizard is going to get re-rendered. So the counter is going to, at the beginning, it's going to be 0. And then every time increment function is called, then the count value is going to increase. And then it will return the text with the count value. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It will keep increasing. All right. So next example is listen. So it's the same counter here, but I use the listen here. So ref listen. And then, like I said, you can register your own callback. So what he does here, every time increment happens, then instead of re-rendering the home view, it will only call back to the callback function here we define. So the counter value, I mean, you're going to have the previous value and next value. So it will just only print out in your console log, but it will not re-render the home view. So let's say instead of here, if I use the text, the text and whatever the counter value I put, it's not going to work because I'm not watching the counter provider, so it will not get re-rendered. Right. So next example is that what if you want to use another provider in the provider? So this is kind of dependency injection you can think of. So here, let's say I have city provider. The initial value is London. And this one is function provider, so actually you cannot really change it. But let's say this can be a class provider, function provider, whatever you want. Okay. And there's another provider called weather provider. And weather provider is watching the city provider. Oops, sorry. And so meaning that every time the city provider's the state is changed, then weather provider is going to get re-rendered too. Something like widget, right? Then city value is going to be changed. Let's say it was London, and then I change this value to Paris. Then the city was London, and then this will change to Paris, and then we will fetch the weather from the backend or whatever with the new value, meaning that this weather provider state is going to get changed or together. So you can make the dependency injection to the provider. All right. So far, everyone is good? Everyone following? Too difficult or too easy? Okay. All right, thank you. Let's continue then. I mean, again, feel free to ask any question if you have. You can raise your hand or you can type in the chat, okay? All right, so how does the provider work? All right, Z have question. You can unmute yourself and then you can speak. Z?
Yeah, he put his question in the chat.
Ah, I see. have you encountered any problem with code generation that would make not using it preferable? That is good question, but in my experience, it's more of taste. I think it's always kind of, the annoying, because even before you start your code work, probably you always need to run the code generation to make sure always, and it takes time always. So I just want to sit down and then start the coding, but sometimes because of some stupid issue, maybe typo or something, because code generation is not happen, it's easy to get encountered any kind of easy mistake or problem. Did it answer your question? Okay. But you can also share if you have any experience with code generation in the chat. Feel free to do that. Okay. All right. So let's see how provider works. So let's say provider scope. So there's I put provider scope, but you can just say that it's just map in the memory in your application. Let's say it's just global, one instance of map. And when I watch one provider, then it will initiate the provider and then put into the map. Okay. And when it's first time watch it, like I say, and let's say you are watching the same provider in any other place in your application, then you already have a provider initialized, right? So you don't need to reinitialize another one, right? So he will reference the one already exists in the map. And let's say another place of your application is watching provider B, then, okay, provider B is not exist yet, right? So when he start watch, he will initialize B provider and put into the provider scope memory. And let's say your widget is disposed that watching B provider, then it's going to be automatically disposed together. So your memory is going to be freed now. And same thing. So let's say there's one widget is not watching anymore for the provider A, then it's going to be disposed. No, because there's still another widget is watching a provider. So a provider is still exists in the map. But finally, if no one is watching a provider, then it's going to get disposed. So your memory is going to be cleaned. So that's basically how provider works. And this is different compared to any other the state management system. Provider doesn't do that. Provider, your widget, your provider is actually widget. So your provider has to be disposed to dispose your everything. All right. So there's a little different type of provider. So auto dispose and keep alive. So Riverpod is by default is auto dispose, meaning that what I explained here, all this is about auto disposing. Okay. So when there's no one is using it, then he will be automatically disposed. That's auto dispose. But let's say you don't want that. Maybe you want to make it alive forever. So let's say you implemented one repository that you don't want to dispose it and you want to use it all the time, initialize, because if you want to reinitialize, maybe it takes time or I don't know. So you want to make it keep alive, right? Then you can put in the annotation saying that, okay, this provider, I want to make it keep alive. So keep alive true. Then this provider, even no one is watching it, it will never be disposed once it's initialized. And next one, let's say what if you want to manually dispose it? Then there's another function called invalidate. and then you can put the provider as parameter. Then counter provider is going to be disposed automatically. So let's say you increase the value to 9, and then if you call invalidate, and next time you watch that provider, the provider value is going to be 0. So there's a little more technique. So you can manually control the how to make it keep alive, how to make it dispose, and a little more technique is there. But I think that's a little advanced, so I'm going to skip it. But if you are interested later, you can go to the official document to see more in detail. All right, so next one I'm going to talk about is the testing. So Riverpod make it also easy to test. So I think it's the same for any other library nowadays. It's kind of basic stuff necessary. But I find that actually using the Riverpod, you can even make it your task quite easy. So you can mock your the Riverpod the provider, or you can change your state, or you can do. I mean, you can do your task using the Riverpod. Nothing difficult. And then if you want to see more detail, you can go to testing, and probably I'm going to show you some demo after as well. All right, so from now on, I'm going to show you how to install the Riverpod. So what you need to do is you just need to copy paste, and then you just, in your project, you're going to add all those dependencies. So Flutter Riverpod, Riverpod annotation, generator, and build runner, custom lint, and Riverpod lint. So last two is not mandatory, but I highly recommend to. And if you are using Riverpod in the pure Dart application, you're not going to use the Flutter Riverpod, but there's another package. I think it's the Riverpod. And if you prefer to do adding dependency manually, you can also update PubSpec, the PubSpec YAML file. And like I said, the lint part is optional, but I also recommend it. So let's say you do some kind of bad practice using the Riverpod, then it will automatically give you some the warnings, or it also provides some kind of auto fix. So it's quite useful feature that I'm going to also show you in the demo. And yeah, so after all, what you're going to do is you need to decide the provider scope. So for the Riverpod, by default, you're going to do the scope, the application level. So in your Flutter entry point of your application, in the main, when you call the run app, you just need to wrap with the provider scope and your entry point wizard. So this is sometimes you use home app, my app, or whatever name you decide, but you just need to wrap it with the provider scope. And now we are ready to code, ready to define the provider and use the provider. Yeah, there's one more thing, is that because of code generation, every time you define the new provider, you need to generate the code, right? So to make it easy, what you can do is you can use the build runner watch. So you just type the command in your project once. Then while you're coding it, if you change any provider, define new provider, then it will automatically generate the code. All right, now I think it's a time to go to the demo. So before we go to the demo, anyone have any question? Okay, looks good. Just in case, I can just copy paste the GitHub link, and I'm gonna share my full screen. All right, everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So I just opened the Riverpod. I mean, the example code that I created. All right. So maybe it's too small, right?
Yes, a
Okay.
little bit smaller. Okay, perfect.
I'm gonna make it bigger, like that.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go to the main Dart. So like I said, I wrapped my entry point wizard with the provide scope. So let me show you this. So let's say if I do this, then you see there's the line. Okay, so I can fix it, add, and there's another line here. So it's saying that Flutter application should have provide scope wizard on top of the wizard tree. So this is the lint warning that from the Riverpod lint. So what I do here, Alt Enter, then just quick fix, add Riverpod scope. I just click, and then provide scope is automatically added. And I do another, to fix the const stuff. And this is the way that you don't forget what you need to do to use Riverpod, and then it makes it easy. Avoid your mistake. All right, so this application, let's see, I'm gonna start the application first. They're running on the Chrome, okay. All right, so this is the application that I built. So I made the generative AP, the AI chatbot application using the Riverpod. Actually, this is kind of refactoring of Google example using Riverpod. But actually, one thing I need to do is I need to connect VPN. Probably I might gonna disconnect it just for 1 minute, possibly, because to call the API, I need to connect the VPN to the US. Okay. Do you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so I click the link. This will go to the AI Studio, I suppose. It did actually. I'm gonna do it in another screen. So for someone doesn't know about this one, this is the AI Studio that Google made for us to test it out to Gemini models. So you can test 1.0 or 1.5. And for this demo, I only need to get API key. I'm going to copy the key and my application. I'm going to copy paste, submit. Then you see the chat UI. So there's the chat list, and then there's input box and the submit. So what you can do, let's say by chat Flutter application. Then this will call the Gemini 1.0 Pro API. Oh, candidate was blocked. Okay. Demo experience, demo effect. Okay, I'm gonna try again. That's weird. Oh yeah, now it does. Right. Chat application using Flutter. I hope this works in this time. Ah, that's actually really weird, though. I feel like Google changes something. Okay, let's try something. Write a story of Flutter dash. Okay, so I can see it's working. I don't know why he's not generating my Flutter code. Was working fine before.
Yeah, maybe I can ask again. That's great.
Yeah, it might be demo effect, but anyway, even that's a demo effect, it's not my fault, it's Google's fault, okay?
No, definitely. Thank you.
Because I'm using the Google API. But yeah, when I ask, he's giving me writing some stories from the Google Gemini API, and they give it to me, and then I put the result in a list. So how I did it, okay, so I think I can. So in the main, so entry point of my application, so I do nothing except the wrapping my wizard with provider scope. And the home screen of my app is chat screen. So if you go there, then it has only two different views in it. I didn't implement the router because to make it simple. So here I'm watching API provider. And if I have API key, I mean, if provider already have API key, then I'm rendering the chat wizard. If API key is not there, then I render the chat wizard that is in the below. So how this provider look like? Let's see. So in the providers folder, I have API key provider, a simple class-based provider that has string state, nullable string state, and default value is null. And I have function set API key. So let's see where I use set API key. Let's go back to the chat screen. So in the API key wizard, so meaning that I'm going to refresh my screen. This screen. So because I don't have API key, it rendered this screen. So like you see here, there's a text on top here. And then there's a link. And then there's a text input field, API key text field, which is consumer stateful wizard that using the Riverpod. So let's say here, I am calling API key provider dot notifier dot the function name. So this is typical way when you need to call a function of class provider. You always do read provider dot notifier, and then you call the method. So in the input value, when it's submitted, I just submit this value to the set API key. Then I just assign this new value to the state. Then in this wizard, thanks to the watch I use, because the API key is changed, this chat screen wizard is going to get re-rendered. And then it will come here again. And now I have the API key in the provider. It will render the chat wizard. I hope everyone is following. If you have any doubt, raise your hand. Okay? So now I put the API key, submit, meaning that I put the key into the provider. So now I rendered chat wizard. So this is the chat wizard. So in the chat wizard, I have two parts. First one is chat list. Second one is the chat input box. So let's start with the input box first. So meaning that if the controls in below. So this one is also consumer stateful widget that I have. Okay, let's say in the text field, when some message is submitted, then I use the ref read like I used in the API key provider. It calls the chat message provider's notifier, and then it calls the send message, send function. And if you go to the send function, okay. So this one is actually chat message provider, send method. This one is get called, right? Then it will use another provider, which is chat session provider. And chat session provider is defined here. So this is what I did for the dependency injection as well. So I initialize generative model with the Gemini Pro model, and then I give the API key that is watching API key provider as well, meaning that when I change it API key, this chat session provider is going to get also recreated based on the new API key. So this instance dynamically changes based on the API key change, same as the widget. So when I call the start chat API, it returns the chat session. That is what I want to store in the chat session provider. That is used in this provider. So in this provider, I just call the set message of the chat session instance. So once I do this, then I'm not going to explain about the generative AI SDK, but once I do this, then it will send to the Gemini API server, and it will get the result in the response. But here I don't use it actually. Instead, what I do, I invalidate the chat content provider, which is watching chat session provider, meaning that when chat session provider change it, then this is also going to get re-rendered, or because I called invalidate, this will be also manually recreated. But what I actually want to do is reading the history in the chat session so that this provider caches the content of the chat history with the format I want. So chat content model I defined here. I could have created a new folder, but I just did it here. So from the content, from the SDK and generative AI SDK, I recreate the model with a string, broad string, text string, and then I made it as a list, and then caching in the chat contents provider. I guess it's a little complex. Yeah, so that's what happened automatically when you call the send function, a send method in the chat provider. So once it did, then we can come back to the chat screen. Here is the chat list widget. Let's see what he's doing. Chat list widget is watching chat contents provider. So meaning that every time chat content is changed, this widget is going to get re-rendered and then re-render the list based on the new information, based on new history in the chat content provider. So it just rendered the list. And that is it. So let's say I type the message here. What should we test here? today. So what is the Riverpod? So when I type the message here and submit, this will come to here, send message, and then this will call this send function of the chat provider that is in the chat session, which is the generative AI model chat session that I stored. And this will send message to the server and then get back to the response that update the history. So to refresh the history in my cache, I am invalidating the chat content provider that refresh my chat content provider. And once this one is refreshed, then the chat list is going to get re-rendered because the history is now changed. Then it will re-render so that this part of the list is going to be also re-rendered. So that's it. So if you, I don't know how you think about this code, but I find that it's more declarative. So I don't really care about all the business logic and so on. What I do is I only define what I want to do, right? So what I want to do here. So let's say I'm just watching this one. Whenever it changes, then I just render my UI. So I don't really care what it is, right? What actually he does inside, right? So, and also in the input, what I do is when I have the new message, I just give it to the provider. No matter he does, he just needs to do what he needs to do, right? So he's going to change the state as loading state, and then I call whatever the SDK, and that's it. And then at the end, I just refresh it, the content, and then what content provider does is just only reading the history from there. So whoever using the chat content provider can render, is able to render based on history. So if someone wants to send the new prompt to the generative AI, Gemini API, then they just need to call send, right? And then anyone need to use the chat session directly, they're gonna just use chat session. So you can make it define what you wanna do based on the state. That's the principle of what we do with a Riverpod, I think. So next one I can show you is about the testing. All right, so this one is the example of testing a widget. So when I do testing, so same thing, you need to, I need to wrap it with the provider scope. And I have the Montreal app widget, and then I put the chat list widget. And this is technique that you can override the provider value. So I use the override with. So this is gonna be the initial value of the chat content provider for my testing. And here I'm gonna find the chat list widget, and then I'm gonna here I'm gonna read container, read the chat content provider, and then I just want to make sure it has 3 items in it. So these 3. And I'm also expecting that the chat item widget is also has 3. So why I'm checking this too is I just want to make sure these widgets are rendered based on the provider. So because I have 3 items, then I know the list builder is supposed to render 3 items, right? So if you go inside, the list view is rendering chat widget, and then this provider has 3 items in it, then of course this is gonna be, list view will render this 3 times. That's what I'm testing. And let's see another example. So this one is the similar example actually. But here what I do is, I think this is the important part. So you can also call your the class-based provider. So I am setting the API key, and then now okay, so first one, the initial value of API key provider is the null, right? Because I'm not overriding anything here. So first time API key wizard, so here, it's gonna be this state, and API key wizard is gonna be found, but chat wizard is not found. And once I set the API key, then it will find chat wizard. So what I did, the task in the real application is I'm putting this and submit, meaning that I just did this one, right? Then chat wizard, there's one chat wizard, but API key wizard is gone now. So find nothing. So this is a way you can do the task really easily. So far, I think it's done for my code demo. So anyone have any questions? Yes, Sioma. Sorry, you can say how, you can teach me how to pronounce your name.
All right, it's Isioma.
Isioma. Okay.
Yes. Thanks for the demo and the presentation. So I have 2 questions. My first question is, I understand that the Riverpod provider is a global, offers a global access across the life cycle of the application.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we deal with issues of multiple global state keys? Because this is a situation that I've encountered. So how do we handle
Mm-hmm.
such that we don't have such errors? LinkedIn help.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have to clarify on that.
So for tackle that problem, you can have 2 different approach. So in Riverpod, there's a technique called family provider that you can differentiate. Even if same provider, you can, depending on the value you are giving to the provider, you can have different instance of provider. So it will initialize, actually I'd better to show you the Riverpod documentation about that. I think, okay, well, I am not finding it. Okay, this document is not completely outdated, but this is outdated, but because this one is using the old style without code generation. But if you use family provider, when you use this provider, you can pass, let's say, like this. So message family provider, it takes the value, and based on that, it will have different provider instance, so that it creates new one, meaning that you have one provider with ID and the other one have ID too. Those are different provider. And this is one way of tackling that kind of issue. And the other way is scope. So Just another documentation, but you can define your own scope. So let's say in the widget tree, you can say that from this scope, I want to have new instance of provider. So you can define the scope using the provider scope, not only here, and then you can define this one in other places to have different the provider instance in your scope of application you want. I think it's the subtree scoping. Yeah, so there's technique called the provider scope that doing this. And yeah, but I mean, most of the time you may want to solve this issue with family rather than provider scope, because it could make it not, I mean, make it complicated to read your code, I think, in general, and not easy to debug once you have the issue too. Did it answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
So my second question is, I needed to give more clarification on the on how the provider is disposed, or if it's still kept alive. So I know when I'm using a state notifier, I have to actually set auto dispose, and when I don't do that, it's the provider. The provider is not disposed. So, but you mentioned that if a widget is watching for that particular provider, it automatically keeps it alive. So I needed to clarify that.
Maybe I didn't understand the last part. You say, so let's say the if anyone is watching your provider, then it will not dispose, right?
Yes,
as long as it keep watching. Yeah. But there's another thing. So let's say if you read a provider, then it's gonna get disposed, because read and watch is different.
Okay. So even if I did not set the provider to auto dispose, as long as any widget is watching for it, it will remain active, it will remain alive.
Exactly. So the case is that if you watch or listen by any of your widgets, then it will keep alive. I mean, it will. I mean, I'm not gonna say keep alive, but it will be stay in the memory. But as long as none of them is watching it, or none of them is listening it, then it will be disposed. So if you really want to make it keep alive, then you're gonna use this to make it keep alive.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. And there's another thing, I mean, some little more the techniques like, I mean, you can also control the life cycle using the on dispose, on canceled, on resume, some the different techniques. But yeah, I think it's not the right moment to tackle this. But you can use this kind of technique to make sure even no one is watching your auto-disposable provider, but you can still make it alive for certain the amount of the time. Maybe you're gonna need this kind of use cases. Let's say you were watching a list and then you go into the detail and then you came back to the list. But when you go into the same item, then you don't want to refetch all the data from anywhere, right? Then this kind of case might be useful and so on. So that let's say you can leave it at least 30 seconds or 1 minute to keep alive, even no one is watching it, then you can benefit the caching, to save your traffic or the loading time and so on. Anyone else?
Excellent. Yeah.
Yes, hi. So I was just curious that since you mentioned yesterday that this is not available in Canada, what VPN do you use? I mean, how if there's a tutorial for that? Because I'm looking at your GitHub right now. So that
Oh,
would be,
okay.
I'm in Montreal, so that's why.
All right. So just for avoiding confusion, so what's not available in Canada is the AI Studio
Mhm.
and Gemini API, right? So
Okay.
Riverpod is available everywhere.
All right.
Just
But
to make sure.
but to be honest, Jhin, I was asking more about that as well because I'm more interested in learning that AI Studio. So if
Mhm.
there's any tutorial on GitHub or anything, you could just paste that. That would really help.
All right. So AI Studio, I mean,
Mhm.
you really need to use VPN. I'm not Googler. I'm just saying that it's available. I'm not technically available. I'm not liable to any legal action and anything, right?
Okay.
But so far, that is the only way that we
Uh-huh.
can use in
No,
Canada.
I totally got the idea what you're trying to say. I'll find a way. Don't worry. I have internet too. No problem.
Yeah.
And like I know,
But
like there are
my-
certain things we cannot say, openly. So I get it. It's okay. Thank you, anyways.
Yeah. But my example is gonna still work as long
Mhm.
as you can access the AI Studio.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.